Think of me as a therapist, conducting you through a session of regression hypnosis. You'll remember the old republic. You'll recall the values that made this country great. Ethics, morality, beliefs. When I count down, 3, 2, 1, you'll be in the Daniel Natal Show. We just had Labor Day at the beginning of the week. An awkward time, especially since the government spent the last 2 years telling you that workers were non-essential. Of course, government bureaucrats claimed that they were essential and never missed a paycheck. But a new study out by Iceland belies that contention. In the article, Icelandic study suggests government workers are unnecessary. We read, following long-standing calls from grassroots organizations and unions, activists convinced the city of Reykjavik to begin trials with 66 people in select offices, measuring performance against a control. The work week was to be reduced by 1, 2, or 3 hours per week, with maintained pay. After some politicking and initial success, the trial exploded to 2,500 employees across all levels of the Icelandic state, with interested departments and offices self-selecting to take part. Any notion of controls disappeared. All employees involved were government officials, ranging from critically important services like the city library and city museum, to parking services and curators of the botanical garden. Yes, really. Among those with the greatest reduction in work, 4 hours per week, we find the police department in Westfjord, which recently made headlines for chasing rumors of a stray polar bear, a remote mountainous area of 7,000 inhabitants and a grand total of 22 officers. The results were apparently astounding, with lots of positive comments by participants and no noticeable decline in any services. The article continues, to be able to work less while providing the same level of service, changes in the organization of work therefore had to be implemented. Most commonly, this was done by rethinking how tasks were completed, shortening meetings, cutting out unnecessary tasks, and shift arrangements. If anything, the story suggests that government employees working less does not cause any identifiable harm to society. Knock me down with a feather. You mean to say that government employees, the masters of needless paper pushing and wholly inessential government services, could work less and nothing seems to have happened to their already questionably measured output? It ends. In a terrible study, Iceland showed that we can reduce the hours worked by public officials without any meaningful negative outcome to society. Shocking, I know. William Gardner, in his book, The War Against the Family, produced an interesting chart. He showed how society was broken up into thirds. 1/3 of society was productive. That is to say, they made things. Cars, paper towels, bowling balls, and so forth. The other third of society was unproductive. Now, between the productive and the unproductive, a new class grew up, namely, bureaucrats, like social workers who existed to transfer tax money from the productive to the unproductive and who also would get a cut themselves of the transfer payments. This new class is now at about 1/3 of the society. So what you have now are 2/3 of society being unproductive and living off the net revenues of the dwindling productive class. This new class of middlemen are basically displacing what we used to call the middle class, as that shrinks due to people being taxed into poverty due to our great new social welfare system. Nobody has to search far for fake philanthropy, like so-called charities, where the CEO makes $1 million a year and where less than 5% of the donations go to the putative cause. 95% goes to the bureaucrats themselves, who claim to administer the charity. See how that works? None other than Mark Zuckerberg himself got a lesson in fake philanthropy when he donated $100 million to help rehabilitate the failing Newark school system, and every cent that he gave was sucked up by the bureaucrats, with not a single cent making it to the teachers or students. The administrators took the money and voted themselves fat raises. The New Yorker did a piece on it entitled Schooled. Cory Booker, Chris Christie, and Mark Zuckerberg had a plan to reform Newark schools. They got an education. Of course, the only way to actually alleviate poverty is to get productivity up. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations talks about this in 1776. The net revenues of any society, he says, are generated by the productive class. The non-productive people live parasitically off the money generated by this class. And it isn't just the poor who Smith classes as the unproductive. He lists several professions as unproductive. For instance, lawyers, actors, soldiers, and so forth. What's sad is that our educational system is doing its level best to steer kids away from productive jobs, in the trades for instance, and to go into unproductive fields, like paper pushers, swelling the ranks of the civil service, and being social workers who live off the largesse of the productive, while they LARP at being altruists helping the poor. According to Kate Rayworth in Donut Economics, in the UK, only 13% of bank loans went to businesses in the productive economy. The rest went to people who wanted to buy stock or get mortgages on houses. This inflated both stock and real estate values. This happened in the 1700s during the Industrial Revolution, where land barons wanted to get in on the money making, but instead of being productive, they just jacked up land values. This imposed heavier rents on factories, which led to higher prices across the entire economy. Remember, one of the main three components of prices are the cost of rent, the other two being the cost of labor and the cost of industrial equipment. So if real estate values inflate, so will prices. And that's exactly what's happening now, as banks are not giving out loans to businesses and productivity, but to help people buy houses, which drives up real estate values. So the inflation we're experiencing now is a direct result of these non-productive practices by banks. In the end, this is of course how countries collapse. In the article, Empire's Fate, we read, "As Europe has shown, massive trillion-dollar packages do not boost the economy. The private sector does. Governments cannot channel capital efficiently. Instead, they fund zombie companies, unproductive sectors, and political cronies. The data back this up." Long story short, the next time Labor Day comes around, understand that the government bureaucrats who claim that you're non-essential, and they are con artists. Know that they're lying. 9/10 of our government could disappear overnight, and none of your services would be cut. In fact, you'd be richer and the economy would take off due to the decreased tax burden everyone would have. The deep state, the other name for the bureaucracy, makes it like we're against the poor. No, the poor are not the problem. The middlemen using the poor as their pretext to ride the gravy train are the problem. Think of the screaming irony of these unproductive charlatans claiming that you're non-essential. No, they're non-essential. Does it ever feel like you're not getting the full story from the media? Like there are dark and powerful forces behind the scenes manipulating national and world events? Well, you're right on both counts. To get the full story, every time, check out Behind the Deep State, hosted by Alex Newman from The New American.